In this episode,
if you buy like a boiler and you stick it in your house, do you have a right old dabble with that for a month? I don't know.
Wives are getting a lot of blame in this episode, aren't they?
After just an exist with a heat pump, we want it on.
Less cycles, less start-stops, less stats on off.
I think my addiction has got a little bit healthier in recent months.
It's March, April is murder. I hate it.
It's all about making these controllers easy to use and easy to understand.
Let it do what it needs to do.
I do remember what it was like to have a gas boiler.
It's just a pleasure to have a heat pump.
welcome back to the award-winning Homeowners Q&A podcast. I'm your host, Mars, and in this episode, we're diving into what it's really like to live with a heat pump, unpacking the lifestyle shifts that can make or break your experience. Joining me for this conversation are Rhiannon de Wreede from Warmer, Simon Baseden from AAC Group, Nathan Tranter from Panasonic, Karl Richardson from Logical, and longtime friend of the show, Hendra. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsor Panasonic for supporting this episode of the Homeowners Q&A podcast. Panasonic has been at the forefront of renewable heating innovation for decades, and their Aquaria range of air source heat pumps is a great example of that commitment. Designed for efficiency, performance, and comfort, the Aquaria line is built to meet the diverse needs of UK homes, whether you're retrofitting an older property or designing a new, low-energy build from scratch. Panasonic continues to push boundaries in this space, helping homeowners transition to cleaner, more sustainable heating with smart, future-ready technology. A huge thank you to the Panasonic team for making this conversation possible. So, Graham, why don't you get the ball rolling for us today? The most recurring question that we tend to see from homeowners, and equally that's repeated by installers and professionals in the industry, is this kind of mental lifestyle shift from running a fossil fuel boiler to a heat pump. Can you tell us just how different it is to live with a heat pump versus having a boiler?
To be honest, that's quite a difficult question for me to answer because I've lived in a house with a heat pump for 15 years and I can't remember what boilers were like. But when I moved into this house about a year ago, unfortunately, I had a gas boiler. So for about a week, we had one. It was horrible. So we had very low pressure hot water. So we had a pumped shower, which is hideous. So you could only get one arm wet at a time. And we didn't really run the heating. So the difference, I suppose, now we're back to a heat pump in this house, is the shower's really, really powerful and it's lovely. And you get in, it's really warm and it's a tank. So you get a very long period of time in the shower if that's your thing. And the other thing is that in the way we've got our house set up, the temperature never changes. So you just walk in, it's like a furnace in this place. It's 23 degrees because that's what my wife likes. And it's 23 degrees, 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day. To be honest, it's very boring. You wander in, the heating's on. You leave, the heating's on. That's it.
I do remember what it was like to have a gas boiler, but 23 degrees, Graham. Oh my goodness. Nobody would have any clothes on in this house. So we've been in this house for about 10 years and we've had a heat pump for about a year and a half now. The difference is marked. Nobody touches the thermostat. There's no need. Like Graham said, constant temperature. Ours is not 23. Ours is at 19. 21, people start taking tops off in my house. So I have to ratchet it down. I mean, it was December when we got ours fitted and we ran it. You want to make sure everything's working and all that kind of stuff after commissioning. So we whacked it up to 21 and the kids, they were walking around like my son was topless. So I was like, right, this is not okay. So ours runs at 19. Nobody touches anything. We have got an evening setback of a couple of degrees because it's a bit cooler in the evening, but that's all programmed in. You don't have to do that every day. You just don't touch anything. It's very hands off after you've set it up. So all the things, I think a lot of the time when we're talking about behavioural changes with a new technology, it's, you've got to do this, you've got to make sure you do that, and you have to change your behaviour. And there's an element of you changing your behaviour with a heat pump, but it's things that you don't have to do. It's not things that you have to add to your routine. You take them away. And I think that is beautiful in a day and age where we're so busy and we've got a million list of things to do as long as you're up, not worrying about your heating and it just being in the background. That's gold.
Karl, you guys obviously have got an air source heat pump. Did you have to make any habit changes to when you guys, because you went from air to air to an air to water heat pump system? Did you have to make any changes to your heating habits?
Yeah, we went from having no heating at all for one winter to having heating from a heat pump the next, and that was That was a big change. So it was all of a sudden went from being Baltic cold to having really nice heat. We've had a terrible heating system installed here, priced the heat pump for over a decade. Going back further than that, in our previous property, we had a boiler. It's just a pleasure to have a heat pump. It's just nice. I'm really fortunate. All my ground floor is underfloor, so I don't see any radiators. I don't see anything on the wall, and the temperature is just perfect in every square foot of the house is fantastic. It's much better than being freezing cold with no heating at all.
So Nathan, I think the one kind of issue that a lot of homeowners have when they first switch to an air source heat pump from a boiler is this whole concept of just letting it run 24/7, kind of comfort versus efficiency. From a manufacturer's perspective, what would you say to them in terms of, trying to convince them to just leave that system when it's required to come on, just let it run 24/7?
I think you are exactly right. So that's the biggest question I get, especially when I'm doing handovers with new builds, which I look at from Panasonic from that side of it. And it's exactly that. It's that whole changing of mindset, because so many people are used to just walking in the house, turning the thermostats up, turning it back down when they're going to work, or vice versa throughout the day, and going from something which people have been doing for generations and generations to now saying, do not touch that thermostat. It is a shock to them. They've now got to sit here and think, but isn't that going to start costing more to run? Surely this isn't right. And it's actually sitting back and going, no, this is actually the correct way of running your heat pump. It's also the most efficient way of doing it. From what I've seen personally, the first year is people really taking it in and going, actually, the first month I'm still going to try and use it like a gas boiler and see, no, we need a little bit more here. But as the months go on, people start trusting in the technology. And after that first year, that's when they have completely brought into it. Trust that heat pump, trust that heating circuit to get them to the temperature they require. We do see it, but it's just that trust.
Simon, how do you convince your customers to actually leave it on all the time? I'm sure that's part of your guidance to them as part of the handover and the commissioning. But how do you kind of drill that home to make sure that they actually do just leave it running?
So I would like to hide the controller and say to them, I've set it up. You don't have to touch anything. And if you really feel like you need to, look around your house and see if you can find it. We try to convince them that we've set it up. We think the settings we've put in for you will keep you really comfortable. And that if you need, for the first 2 or 3 months, if you feel that you need it slightly warmer, press up once, 24 hours later, check again, or press down once. And then that just offsets their curve very slightly. And we try to express that where it's slow, give it time. So even though we'll know it reacts within a few hours, asking them to wait till the next day is more than covered. We don't worry whether they've touched it a bit quicker. In my experience, what I've found also is some people that are absolutely fascinated with the running costs, and within 2 hours, they're told, while you're still commissioning it, going, oh, I noticed it used like 0.5 kilowatt. And you go, yeah. On the opposite side, it's exciting for some people to have new technology. So you can encourage them to embrace it that way and say, yep. So imagine just leave it running at that setting for permanently, and then it should all even out. So, but we're learning as we go with each customer, each install, and each design.
I think that's fair, Simon, actually, because I people who are interested in it and they want to all of a sudden sort of how much energy you're using makes sense to them, and a lot of people aren't going to be interested, but for the people who are, I think it's a really, really lovely thing, like educational piece, but that does wear off. I think when I first got my solar, I was, sort of trying not to. Yeah, exactly. But it wears off, doesn't it? It does wear off for a while.
For about a month, I was fascinated with what it was doing by the minute, the hour, the week, the month, and then the last time I looked at it was about 3 years ago or 2 years ago, whenever it was, a month after it was installed, and then I was like, oh yeah, I need to get it cleaned. That was it. That's the only thought. So yeah, I suppose that's an analogy. Treat it like your solar. Be excited about it and touch it for a month, and then eventually it will fade into the background and you'll forget that you even do anything with it.
Because you trust that it's working right. You know it is. You know you're warm. You know everyone's got hot water in the mornings for their shower or in the evenings after they've been working, whatever. You know your system and you trust it. And it's something then you don't have to think about.
Are you thinking about getting a heat pump? Then don't get caught out by a bad installation. Bodge Buster is your essential guide to asking the right questions and spotting red flags before it's too late. Written from real homeowner experience, this book gives you the knowledge to avoid costly mistakes and make informed decisions. Get Bodge Buster today in print or for Kindle, link in the description. we've now had a heat pump for 7 years, and I'm still guilty, probably just because I'm a bit tight, kind of in spring and autumn, when you got a nice bit of solar gain coming through the windows, the house is warming up, it's a bit cool outside, I'm still very tempted to turn off the heat pump kind of between 11 and 3 and 4 just to save, 8, 9, 10 kilowatts. Does that make me a really bad person, Graham?
No, I have exactly the same thing. So you can see I'm sitting here next to a window. That window is south facing. I did a blog about this. March, April is murder. I hate it. I get up in the morning, I can hear the heat pump running. If I listen really carefully, I can hear it outside. And I'm there going, come on, in an hour, the sun's going to warm this place up. Just don't heat it for the next hour and just save me 10p. Because I'm that tight too, and I do look at my solar occasionally, and I'm guilty of having a laptop connected to my heat pump so I can see exactly what it does. But I'm a bit of a weird guy. I don't recommend that. You probably save yourself £1 over the year fretting over this stuff, and you could probably, do something better, like buy 1 bottle of wine a year less and so make more money. Some people are obsessed for longer. I completely understand what everyone said. Whatever new technology you get, when I got my new mobile phone, I was on it, messing around with it, all that for the first month. Now I never look at the bloody thing unless it makes it right. It's normal. And I think that's one of the nice things about doing an installation in these sort of the so-called shoulder months. Like now, have a right old go at your heat pump. Go crazy. And we'll come back in September and put everything back again. But if you do that in November, they go, I'm cold, I had a cold shower and so on. Same with the boiler. I don't know, because I'm not a boiler guy, but if you buy like a boiler and you stick it in your house, do you have a right old dabble with that for a month? I don't know.
There'd be few and far between the people that do that, I think.
Nathan, one of the biggest questions that we get from homeowners actually relates to weather compensation. Graham mentioned the shoulder months. So the issue that they very often have is that you're kind of in late spring or early autumn where the weather compensation, because the heat pump has been running throughout the whole summer, is obviously doing hot water. The heating starts to sporadically come on and off depending on how that weather compensation is set up. And it drives quite a lot of homeowners crazy in that the house is not cold enough for the actual heating to be coming on yet. The weather compensation is still triggering that. So in terms of Panasonic or other manufacturers, are there any kind of settings that you can do to override that, to just maybe just keep that heating off, or to maybe push that temperature up a little bit more, so just to prevent that heat pump coming on unnecessarily, really, because the house just doesn't need it?
Exactly that. And this is the key one. It always comes down to how well that heat pump has actually been commissioned. So especially in the Panasonic heat pump, for example, you've got a setting in there. If we do hit this temperature outside, let's just manually automatically turn that heating system off for you, because we know you aren't going to want to be heating your home up from that point. But then when you actually start people considering how weather comp does work, and people having to really go into a bit more technical details from that side of it, I think a lot of it also does stem from when you actually look at what's controlling that heating system. And this doesn't have to just be a heat pump. This can be an electric boiler. It can be a gas boiler, all these different bits. And that's where progression actually, in that heating control has been happening really for a good about 10, 15 years ago. If you look at the introduction of the smartphones that's coming to market, that was a big mindset when these started coming in. Gas boilers, we started looking at your load comps and all these kind of bits. And it's that kind of technology has been around, but it's that same again. It's that education piece. It's helping us from a manufacturer go, yes, some people might be struggling with this aspect of it, but how can we make it easy so you don't really need to use it, but it is in there in the background doing it automatically. And it is by doing them set points. Gets that temperature outside, let's automatically turn your heating system off, and then we can just really concentrate on the hot water side of it. It's all about making these controls easy to use and easy to understand.
So I appreciate that you can only answer this from a Panasonic perspective, but is there a setting so is it the outdoor ambient temperature that if it hits, let's say 15 or 16 degrees, that's the kind of trigger point for the weather comp? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, 100%. So quite commonly, especially when we start looking at a new build property, they do start faring around. Sometimes it's done at -3, -4 for your colder temps, and then up to +15, +16 when we reduce your flow temperature. Traditionally, from when I speak to installers, most installers tend to put it on about, as soon as we get to 21, 22 degrees outside, let's actually turn your heating circuit off at that point. But same again, that conversation with the homeowners, let's change some preferences. Some people might like that to be on for a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, but that's where we can have these conversations with your installer to help out.
So, Carl, how much do you actually fiddle with your heat pump?
Too much sometimes, unhealthily so. As a bit of a project, trying to see how much I can get out of it by using things like weather comp, by using fixed flow settings, etc. So I think my addiction has got a little bit healthier in recent months. Just quickly mentioning weather comp. So I do run it on weather comp, but not the recommended weather comp. So I do run it at 20 degree ambient, 20 degree flow, but I run it at about 33, 32, I think, for my underfloor. Not even below than that, then it's -2. So I really fiddle with my weather comp quite a lot. Graham, you might correct me on this, but I don't think my weather comp would come on if this stat says that the room's warm enough. So if I've got it set at, say, 19 in the evening or 18 downstairs at night, and it's then kind of the ambience getting a little bit lower where you think about coming on, if the room temperature is satisfied, it wouldn't come on anyway. Weather comp, we can look into that a bit too detailed. I think the stat is the primary. If that is satisfied, then your heat pump won't run anyway.
Yeah, the point you got to remember about weather comp, everyone gets really excited about it, but there's nothing special about weather comp, right? So you've got a thermostat in your house. If you turn your thermostat off, the heat pump stops. If you turn it on, it starts. When it starts, it sends a little message to the outdoor unit and says, "Hello, mate. How cold is it outside?" It says it's snowing. He goes, "Well, I better run quite warm. So I'll run the radiators warm." What Nathan says about this basically ambient limit, everybody does this. It's a standard feature. So you basically, what you say is, if it is above 20 degrees C outside, whether or not the thermostat comes on, no matter what inside the heat pump, no, it would be insane to run the heating on a day like today. You do occasionally get people, I've had it in hotels where people say, "I want the heating on, it's 25 degrees outside." And you think, are you mental? But those people are called my wife. She wants the heating on. She doesn't care what's going on. So I think you have to be a little bit careful as a designer, as a commissioning engineer, because everyone's different. Some people are cold, some people are hot. Weather comp was put together years ago when we had no processing power in the unit. So it's basically quite a simple calculation, a simple little graph, but it's really very last few years. What the systems now do is they don't really do weather comp at all. What they do is they look at the difference between what temperature you want in the room and what temperature the room is, called room temperature optimization. If you got home tonight and your house was 18 degrees and you wanted it to be 21, what you want the unit to do is rev up a little bit, produce a little bit warmer water, get us up to 21. And then instead of going off, just pushing the water temperature down and finding that point. So in Carl's house is quite extreme by the sound of things. It might be that in November, his radiators might be all right at 25 degrees and it will still hold the house at 21. In my house, I've got filthy old rads from the 1990s, so they'd be running at 45, 50. So each house is different. The beauty of room temp optimization is you don't have to set anything up. You just set the temperature and say the unit, try and get there, and I'll just go and make dinner, and it does all the work. So weather comp now is fading away. It's there. It's in the background as a rough guide, but room temp optimization, you don't actually know it's there. It just kind of does it, which is lovely. Yeah, make me 21 degrees. I know I always talk about my fabulous car. I've got a very ordinary car. But your car has got room temperature optimization. Think about it. You get in on a cold day, you set 21 degrees, you drive down the road, and it belts the heat out like the clappers until that car gets to 21, and then it all calms down again. That is room temperature optimization, the best there is. None of us in heat pump land have worked out how to do it like a car yet.
Overnight setbacks is something that a lot more homeowners are talking about. Is that in a way counterintuitive to what we were talking about, just leaving a heat pump running 24/7, just letting it do its thing, as opposed to you manually fiddling and pulling back the temperature maybe 1 or 2 degrees overnight? What's your take on setbacks?
Yeah, it's personal. Again, it's personal how people like sort of how you live in your house. We fitted heat pumps for people who are like, I don't want it over 16. And then I wouldn't recommend a setback temperature probably then for them if they're having their house at 16 the whole time, that kind of thing. If you want to be cozy and warm, or if you want to sleep under just a sheet all year round, or you don't want a massive duvet, or, whatever, however you live in your house, you really got a gorgeous pair of fluffy pajamas that you want to wear, have a setback temperature. but only have it 1 or 2 degrees, not anymore, really. That's generally what we advise. Just because the heat pump will sort of have to work that a little bit harder to get back up to temperature for when you wake up in the morning and realize that you don't need your fluffy slippers anymore.
Simon, do you recommend setback temperatures for your clients?
So what we do is we ask a lot of questions as how do you want it to operate, because these machines are programmable and adaptable. There's a scale. You can do 16, 22, so you can say don't let it go later than 16. Don't let it heat up more than 22, because most people design to 22 as a maximum or thereabouts. I think it's like a car where it runs slightly more efficiently at running at 30 or 40%. What we're aiming for is to turn the machine on, get it to temperature, and let it idle for as long as possible. Less cycles, less start-stops, less stats on-off. That'll all go. And I think a lot of the new apps, online apps that are being adaptable to these, and as Graham was saying before when we were talking in the past, that the manufacturers are going to do this anyway. They're all looking for this dynamic heat control within a room. They're going to measure a room, ultimately, hopefully multiple rooms or 2 rooms or 4 rooms. They'll all talk to each other. That technology has been out for 20 years anyway, being able to mesh, network, Bluetooth and stuff. It just needs to talk to the main controller, to the heat pump, and say, look, I'm 19 upstairs, I'm 21 downstairs. Do you know what? I'm there. That's what I wanted. And I can run at 25%, 30% forever now. And I think also manufacturers should allow them to overshoot by, let's call it 2 or 3%. So don't stop at 22 as a hard stop. Start ramping down until you can't ramp down anymore. And then when you reach 23, you could write a rule in it saying that's your hard stop. So hopefully I'd never reach it and it would just idle and idle and idle. I think what we've got is something that works about 70, 80% perfect, and it will come. And I think Graham's team's working on it, and there's other manufacturers coming up with some better delta T's across the coils, and it's going to come between now and 10 years. We're going to get better controls, better delta T, less disturbance in houses, less radiator changes. I think we're at the beginning of the big changes, and not the beginning of heat pumps, before everyone shouts at me. So, my advice is, what do you want? And I'll program it like that. The good news is, if they change their mind in 3 years, it's only a service visit, and we'll go change it to another way if they want it, or add another technology, because I think there'll be add-ons.
Nathan, just going back to set points. So on the Panasonic units, is that something that you can do quite easily? In terms of if a homeowner wanted to have setbacks programmed, can they just go and do it themselves, or do they have to involve their installer?
The key thing is all about making that controller actually easy to use, no matter how old you are, 5 to 95. So on the Panasonic controller, exactly that. Just click on the main menu, you can go into the schedule itself, and we can set a setback. But exactly what we keep saying, and even we still show it in our menus, is that on and off. Ignore off. Off doesn't exist with a heat pump. We want it on. So if we are looking at your setbacks, 21 degrees, let's say we're having that in the living room, for example, right now, do just keep that on and knock that back really max to about 19 degrees. But it's exactly that. It has to be easy to use. If it's not, people press too many buttons, start getting confused, and end up just start getting a less efficient heat pump. But even when you actually look at manufacturers' controls, and when you look at an industry right now, same if you looked at the gas boiler industry really about 10, 15 years ago, everyone was using the thermostat that realistically came with the boilers. Yes, you had some Honeywell stats knocking about, but then if you look how quickly that progression happened with the introduction of smart thermostats, where all these manufacturers were put in even more algorithms and even more testing and focusing on the control aspect. I think when we start looking at a heat pump, I think that's something that we probably are going to see in market really starting to progressing quite quick. Is yes, manufacturers, especially ourselves, we do have quite an easy control to use, but I think we will start seeing some third-party integration coming into it. And the key one is not by having an on-off switch. Of course, there needs to be fully be able to control, saying the weather comps, the flow temps of the actual unit, but also getting them to put their expertise on it to even look at making that bit easier. Another example of Taylor have just released a product to market where they use something called a heat pump optimizer, which plugs into the MOSFET connections on the heat pumps. And I think, yes, it's our job as a manufacturer to keep that easy as possible. But I do think we are going to see other introductions coming to marketplace from third-party thermostat manufacturers as well.
So Simon, you've been playing around quite a lot with Havenwise. So from a homeowner's perspective, if a homeowner does switch to a product like Havenwise, does it simplify kind of all of this interaction that they'd potentially have to do, and it just basically lets their products just run the show?
So it works like with what Graham was talking about earlier. It's a room target temperature. So it sees there's a big difference. It ramps the machine right up, lets it catch up, and then idles it right down, and then does its best to hold it back off that temperature by half a degree. And then they simplified the direct hot water by allowing you multiple on times. You can set 3 or 4 on times. You can say, and it ignores the hot water between them times. So it's something I learned recently, actually, when I was trying to work something out. But if you turn the water on at 6 in the morning, it will heat the water until it reaches its temperature. And then it'll ignore you until the next on temperature. So it doesn't have an off temperature. So just its off is just when it reaches temperature. So if you use the water between 8 and 9 and it runs out until it turns back on at 12. And then all you've got to say to the client is that put as many ons as you want to keep the water going. The idea is it doesn't keep cycling between the ons. So if you know that you work and you need the water first thing in the morning and you want it to turn back on in the evening, ready for the next morning, you can program it twice. But it's adaptable, so it's a learning curve of all of it. But yeah, that works on target temperature as well, and then operates the heat pump how it sees fit to get the best optimization out of it. And then in the background of that, it's always keeping an eye on your tariffs and your time of use and your weather. And I think they're a little bit more accurate. The manufacturer we use a lot has got an external ambient probe temperature on the back of the coil 2 inches away from it, so it's not massively accurate if you put it on the south side of the building, and that's where you've got to install it. I think with the apps, they're weather stations, so they take the nearest multiple weather stations, and it's probably half a degree more accurate, maybe a degree, which might be a lot in heat pump world, to be honest.
Are you new to heat pumps and feeling lost? Then From Zero to Heat Pump Hero helps you understand, operate, and optimize your system. No jargon, just simple practical advice from one homeowner to another. Take control of your heating and save energy. Get your copy now. Link in the description. Carl, how does living with a heat pump affect your hot water usage?
It's my wife that affects my hot water usage. Gosh, I think she was in again for 25 minutes this morning. But in all seriousness, it's quite smart. So if somebody does empty half the cylinder, it's hot water priority. So there's enough energy in your heat pump for it to turn off for 20 minutes, half an hour, even as long as an hour, whilst it reheats your hot water. So there's enough residual heat left in your heating circuit for that to continue running with the pump whilst your hot water's being heated. So it doesn't and shouldn't make any difference at all, really.
Wives are getting a lot of blame in this episode, aren't they?
Partners, sorry.
But I'm going to blame my kids. So I've got 2 teenagers, and it's the summer holidays. One of them is working out in doing gardens with a friend. So he's having a shower before he goes to work, and he's having a shower when he comes back in, right? And these are long showers. My daughter, she'll have a shower in the morning, and then invariably she'll go in the sea or something like that. So she's having a shower or a bath. So we've got, like, I feel at the moment we have got a high hot water usage, and we've got a 300-litre cylinder. We have no problems at all. I was umming and ahhing about getting some solar thermal in just for fun, though. You know, like my husband would buy a new set of golf clubs, I might buy some solar thermal too. But I had a look on my Havenwise app, and I think it's about 50p a day at the moment.
Graham, Rhiannon mentioned and Carl mentioned kind of priority, but ours is set the same. So as soon as our differential hits, a certain point where if it's set to 45 and it drops to 30 or whatever it is, it actually reheats the hot water. There's a lot of installers that we've been hearing about, and a lot of homeowners that actually just want to prioritize their water once a day. Is that more of a preferential thing, or is that a sensible strategy?
If you want to save money, the secret is to try and heat your hot water just in time for you to jump in the shower and then leave it cold. So, example, in our house, I get up at 7 every day and I have a shower at 7. So it's really nice if the cylinder is hot by 7. But my wife has a shower in the evening. So if the hot water is then cold from 7:15 until 10 to 8, who cares? Why bother keeping it hot if no one uses it? So we know our usage, so we target our heat pump to only heat the water for when we need it. If you've got kids and so on, we don't have kids, or they've long gone, probably because we didn't have enough hot water. But if you've got kids and you've got sort of a bit of a wild use, a bit more like Rhiannon was describing, you might think, sod it, I'm just going to keep this thing hot all the time. The extremes are do what I do, which is literally you heat for the bare minimum you can, so you're just there in time. It's the cheaper way to do it because I'm making pretty much exactly the amount of water I need. The alternative is leave the cylinder hot all the time. So every time I jump in the shower, this machine catches up and tops the cylinder up again. It's going to cost you more money because you keep doing the job. But how much more money depends on how much more hot water you use. I mean, you've got to accept that hot water is just energy. Your hot water cylinder to me is just a battery. So a 300-litre hot water cylinder is a 13 kilowatt hour battery. That's all it is. So to fill it up takes 13 kilowatt hours of energy to do that. If you don't use any hot water, you don't use any kilowatt hours of energy. Happy days. And you can see that you're very sad and you look at your app. I've done this. You go on holiday and your energy use of your house collapses because there's no one at home. And you go, oh, look at that. We're running on 2 kilowatt hours a day. This is amazing. Go, yeah, we're not there. The heating's off. The hot water's off. And then you come back and it goes crazy again. So I think the key is, if you want to save money, sort of have a bit of a think about, could you build a strategy that suits you? Because I've seen people complain about, I jumped in the shower at 4 o'clock yesterday. It was cold and I hate my heat pump. That's because the installer and the homeowner haven't talked it through. When I used to advise people how to do it, because all I was interested in is not getting phone calls, we used to run the hot water 24/7. Just always keep the cylinder hot and then say to the customer, right, would you like to save a little bit of money? Once they're used to it, after a month or so, we can give you some advice on knocking that back. But it really is such personal taste. I would turn off the water main if anyone in our house was in the shower for more than 10 minutes, because that is eating into my money for my wine, and that's not acceptable.
I'm going to give Panasonic a bit of credit, if that's okay. Manufacturers bang on about efficiency of their heat pumps, and rightly so, but they sell cylinders that are C-rated. And I'm going to go back to Graham's comment about, if you don't use any hot water, then it's not costing you anything. But if you go on holiday for a week, your cylinder will drop temperature naturally. I believe an A-rated cylinder will drop roughly 1.5, 2 degrees a day, but a C-rated cylinder will drop significantly more. So if you go on holiday for 7 days and, for instance, your heat pump was turned off, so it wasn't reheating it, you will come back to a pretty cold cylinder. But the actual branded Panasonic cylinders, they are the only ones I know. Correct me, obviously, if you know others. They are the A-rated, the Ozo-built A-rated cylinders. I think that needs a lot of credit, because we keep going on about energy efficiency. Oh, look at our COP, isn't it fantastic? Have a C-rated cylinder while you're at it with our branding on it. And I think that's fundamentally wrong, and it's contradictory. So if any manufacturers are listening, can you sort that out, please?
You have to be really careful with cylinders. I mean, if you thought that VW were a bunch of shysters for what they did in Dieselgate, take a look into hot water cylinders. There's some really interesting ways you can test your cylinder to get amazing efficiency. You have to heat the cylinder and let it cool and all this kind of stuff, and you measure the efficiency and so on. But there's a few loopholes. And one of the loopholes is there's no time limit for how long it takes to heat a cylinder. And a couple of the manufacturers have worked out that if you take 24 hours to heat the cylinder up, you get a higher efficiency than if you heat it up in an hour. So they're all trundling along doing this bizarre test and lying through their teeth. And you're there going, this is madness. So I think all I look at in a cylinder, when I bought mine, has it got a load of foam on it? That's all you can do as a homeowner. Has it got a load of foam? They've all got a load of foam. I'm sure on the label they'll say they're a lot different, but I would be genuinely amazed that there was a bloody awful cylinder. Unless it's one of those old copper cylinders with the red duvet, I think there's probably not much in it.
And I think, to be honest, you are right. When you actually look at cylinders, put those nets to each other, you look at actually what's insulating the system. It is very similar. But I think that's, once again, when you look at the Future Home Standard in new build, the Future Home Standard, when the first draft got released, was we need X amount of insulation around the cylinder, which meant you couldn't get the cylinder through the door upstairs. Never mind replacing it further down the line. And I think that's where a lot of innovation, once again, needs to start being focused on. And I personally, from our kind of side of it, a Panasonic side of it, we've got something that's called Euphacura. Euphacura, when you actually look at the depth of it, it's probably only about that thin. So it's not always kind of about how thick the insulation is. It's all about the quality of that insulation that's going around the cylinder itself. And yeah, Graham, you're exactly right. It's how much is that being looked into as an industry right now? Is it something that needs to be looked at more on? Yeah, I think there's a big room for inefficiency and what we can do in that market.
Simon, just getting back to the efficiencies of hot water. So when we had our heat pump fitted, it was set to, we changed it to 45 degrees because that's the way that we like our hot water. And the differential on that was set to 5 degrees. So basically that meant that when that dropped to 39.9 degrees, the heat pump would kick in and would reheat that hot water to 45 degrees. It was actually, I think after I spoke to Graham a couple of years ago, that I had an idea in terms of just wanting to preserve our compressor a little bit longer. So we wanted to extend that reheat time as opposed to just coming on and reheating up to 5 degrees. we've actually dropped our differential by 15 degrees. So now when our hot water drops to 30 degrees, that's when the hot water reheats. So basically that reheat time is really drawn out in terms of how long it takes. That works for us because we're at home all the time, and we know that we've got a 300-liter cylinder, so we never ever turn the tap on and the hot water's cold. I think for a lot of people maybe where that usage is a lot higher, maybe that strategy doesn't work for them. What's your take on it?
36.52. So usable water is 36 degrees C, assuming you want it warm enough to wash. 36 degrees C to 52. If you add 2 degrees, so let's call it 38, that gives you draw off probably 1/3 of that cylinder. 300 litres, you'll get 100 litres use. In my opinion, anywhere from mid-30s onwards is usable. Less energy put in, etc. So what you're doing basically is reducing recycle, having a not long drawn out heat load. This is what the heat pump wants. My advice would be Mars and Mrs. Mars. How often do you shower and bath? Do you do twice a day? Do one of you in the morning, one in the evening? Oh, both in the evening around this. Let's heat it up to 51 degrees. So there's 2 baths worth or 2 showers worth of water, and just reheat it the next day somewhere between first thing in the morning if you're going to do washing up. Most people have dishwashers that economically heat their own water because it holds less than a litre and so on and so forth. So I just design it. I plan it with you. The good news with this is you sell your home to a family of 7. You say, oh, AAC have been looking after my system for a long time. We go in and say, well, the first thing we'll do for you is we'll put your water back on 24/7 because we can see there's 7 baths a day. It's all changeable. My advice would be economic use, more or less what Graham said, extend that differential, allow the heat pump to heat it slower, longer, and see what works for you. If you decide that, for example, heating up from 5 till 7 isn't quick enough to get your baths, turn it on sooner or reduce the gap. I think what will be good, which we do a little bit, is we can online we can change it a bit. It's free of charge, a phone call to us. You can go, oh, it doesn't quite work, it doesn't get warm enough, quick enough, or last long enough. Last long enough is higher temperature and close the gap. Quick enough could be turn it on quicker. It's not a race car. We're not trying to get to the finish line as fast as we possibly can. It's an economic race. We're trying to control everything using as lower energy as we can and prolong the life of the equipment. So unfortunately, the answer hasn't got an answer that's straightforward. It's subject to your home, your use, your habits, and your system and your installation.
Graham, could you just explain to us why hot water in a heat pump is far more costly to actually run than central heating? So, and what I mean by that is, so if you set your hot water to 45 degrees centigrade and you set your radiators to 45 degrees, so your flow temperature to 45, your hot water is going to be far more inefficient than your radiators. Why is that?
If you ran your hot water and your heating at the same temperature, so in your example, 45 degrees, then the run costs would be about the same. The secret in heat pumps is you pay for temperature. So when we've just had a load of testing done on one of our units in a hot water cycle, and when you start, so you got the cylinders cold, but the efficiency is amazing, the run cost really low because the cylinder's at 10, 15 degrees. So the heat pump's really trundling on, going, this is a piece of cake, off we go. Once you start getting up into the 40s, it's got to change up through the gearbox a little bit, put some more effort in and so on. And if you are, I've seen people, because you can do this, I've seen people run their cylinders at 75 degrees centigrade. Pretty mad, but that's what they want to do. It's their money. So once you're up in the 60s and 70s, you are thrashing that heat pump to death. And then they go, it's expensive. You go, of course it's expensive. You're redlining this thing. The advice given is amazing. I think it's really, really good. Yeah, we do the same. High 40s is all we do in our cylinder because I get in the shower and basically have a shower almost in neat hot water. Why bother heating the water to 70, mixing a load of cold in? It's crazy. But people are worried about Legionella, which is another issue. We'll talk about another day. It's a whole can of worms. So if you can drop your cylinder temperature down, you're going to reduce your run cost. Looking at data, if you're running, so quite a lot of people are running in a very high 50s as their target temperature. If you do that over the year, you're going to get a COP of 2. No matter whose heat pump you get. In the hot water, you're going to get 2, especially if you're doing the lift it from 50 to 55 again and again and again. You'll get a higher COP if you let that cylinder drop all the way down because you're doing that cold bit. But the worst thing you can do is run your cylinder at 65 all day, only let it drop 2 degrees and bash it from 63 to 65 time and time again. That really hammers the unit, really costs money. What you're doing is good, long, give it a bit of a cold spell all the way out, let it gently ramp up. Also, there's a massive sort of physicsy thing, which is your heat pump really, really struggles to get the heat out of it into the water in your cylinder. You've got a coil inside your cylinder, like a steel hose pipe. No matter what cylinder you get, you just can't get a big enough coil in there. If you got a big enough coil in there, you wouldn't have any room for water. So the units do struggle a little bit to get their heat out of the heat pump and into the water. So you get a bit of cycling and so on, which is why a lot of people recommend new cylinder on every job. It's a pretty good golden rule that, unless you've got some deep-seated love affair with your old cylinder, putting a proper heat pump cylinder in, it will pay back. It will work. I recommend it highly.
Rhiannon, Graham said we're going to talk about Legionella another time. That's not the case. We're going to talk about it right now. So why is Legionella such an issue for homeowners? Everybody keeps harping on about Legionella. Is it really a problem?
When you're talking about people's health, there is always a risk. People do not want to take the taking the responsibility for somebody. It would take one person to get Legionellas, and it would be, absolutely awful. But the risk is incredibly small. Legionella in a domestic setting, obviously some people are vulnerable living at home and that kind of stuff, in which case I would always recommend the Legionellas. I mean, when to do the Legionella cycle, that's another sort of up for debate, every week, every 10 days, every 2 weeks. And that'll all sort of come into play with how much you use your hot water. Like I've said, we're going through our hot water. There's no hot water sat in the hot water cylinder for very long in this house at the moment. But if you maybe are going to have a bath a week or something like that, you have got water sat there ready to be a breeding ground. If you're designing a system and someone tells you that that's their hot water use, that would be not normal. Legionella's cycle, I have controversially turned mine off. Dun, dun, dun. But I take full responsibility for my health and for the health of my family.
Carl, is yours on?
I don't think it is. No, I think I turned it off because it's kind of the onus is on you. So it is a tough thing, isn't it? If you've got that C-rated cylinder and you do go on holiday for 10 days and come back and you haven't reheated it, yes, there's a possible breeding ground there. If you don't use your shower head and there's stagnant water in there, if you don't use your bath taps, I've not had a bath for 2 years. If I have a shower, that's because I haven't had a bath for 2 years, in that we've just rebuilt our house. It is a very tricky situation.
So there's a couple of interesting things about Legionella. So the first thing is that Legionella is a bacteria, like, a bacteria you get on cheese. If it's in water and you drink it, you don't get Legionnaire's disease. Okay, what happens is you get Legionnaire's disease if you breathe the bacteria into your lungs. So it's bizarrely, your highest risk is when you jump in the shower, when you first turn the shower on and you breathe in and there's steam and you that's your highest risk. It's very strange in this country. It's very different in Europe from here. But in the UK, there are no regulations of any kind about Legionella in domestic applications. There are very strict regulations in commercial applications. And it's dead serious. Yeah, that's no pun. If you are working in a hospital and somebody gets Legionnaire's disease and you're in charge of the water system, they charge you with manslaughter. It's really, really serious. So what people do is they apply the commercial application to the domestic. So we overreact. When I used to flog heat pumps to people, I have never had a Legionella cycle in my heat pump ever in my life. That's my house. I'm like Rhiannon. It's my choice. When I sold heat pumps to people, I absolutely refused to tell them how to turn it off. I'm not taking a risk in your house. I don't think it's a very high risk. You don't get Legionella in the house, but one person gets Legionella and, Graham sold you a heat pump and Graham told you to turn it off. Doesn't look great on LinkedIn. So I would suggest, if you are in any way cautious about this, especially if you're running those low temperatures in your cylinder, once you get to 60, there's no risk at all. But if you're running in the 40s like me, might be worth bashing a Legionella cycle in. Most people do it once a week in a cheap rate, so middle of the night. Might be worth it. And if you as a homeowner are concerned about it, all you need to do is just run your immersion heater once a week, or some decent heat pumps now will do the Legionella cycle with the heat pump. Just blast the cylinder up to 60 for 10 minutes once a week. Everything's done and dusted, and that's fine. If you want to save the money and take the risk, Your installer may tell you how to turn it off or give you the book and get you. I used to say to homeowners, you set it. I'm not doing it because I really hate prison food.
Nathan, what's the default setting on Panasonic machines for Legionnaires?
Default off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure it's 65 degrees for half an hour. Monday, and suppose it is at lunchtime. It's one of the first things I always get people to the installers to do, is to knock it back into the middle of the night to make sure we are getting them affordable rate on the electric price of it.
So Simon, wrap up the episode for us today. So for somebody that's actually watching this episode that has tuned in, they are now thinking about getting a heat pump, or they've just had one installed this summer. What should they be doing differently to what they've been doing for the last 20 years with their boiler?
Once they've managed to get it to make it feel comfortable and they've done a reasonable season, so either winter to spring or autumn to winter, so that's going to be your best period and you're comfortable with it, have the confidence, like everyone's been saying today, to just let it do what it needs to do, get it maintained a little bit, look after it if you can yourself, keep it clean, and ignore it and forget you ever bought one, and hope it lasts 20 plus years.
If you've got any questions about heat pumps, then you need to join the Renewable Heating Hub forums. You can connect with other homeowners, share experiences, and get advice on heat pumps and renewables. Sign up today and be a part of the conversation. Link in the description. So that's a wrap for this episode of Homeowners Q&A. A huge thank you to our brilliant guests, Rhiannon, Nathan, Graham, Simon, and Karl, for their honest and practical insights into what it really takes to live with a heat pump. We hope that this episode has given you some valuable takeaways, whether you're already running a system or planning for future retrofits. A big thank you to Panasonic for sponsoring this episode, and if you haven't already, pre-order your copy of The Ultimate Guide to Heat Pumps, our new book that's packed with expert advice and everything you need to make informed, confident decisions about your heat pump journey. Link in the description. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye. Is anybody going to say anything controversial before I stop recording?
I was hoping you were going to let me do the wrap up, and I was going to go, my advice is absolutely opposite of what Simon said. I would say have a right old dabble with a controller and then get straight on Facebook and slag off your installer.